Hi, my name is Doris Vitok. My sister and I have written and published a poetry book called Dancing Fingers. Here it is. Of course, I have done some writing before that. You may know me for my first book. It's called Flying Fingers, Master the Tools of Learning Through the Joy of Writing, and it contains 9 of my stories. And most recently, actually just a few weeks ago, I published my third book. It's Young in Disguise, and it is a full-length novel. I really enjoy all types of writing, but poetry is one of my favorites. So today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about poetry. So I'd like to show you how to write poems to amuse yourself. And in the process you may accomplish the dreadful goals of satisfying your teachers and making your parents proud. So what word do you think of when you see this roll of toilet paper? Normal toilet paper it looks like. What about this fearsome looking stuffed animal? Poetic is probably not the first word that comes to mind, but I'm here to show you that the most insipid of everyday objects can provide a jumping off point for poetry inspiration. So I'd like to talk to you about getting started in your writing journey, and one of the first things I'd like to say is that poetry does not have to be serious. Yeah, so when we think of poetry, we may sometimes think of really, really dry, boring, long, epic, serious things, but really poems can be a variety of forms and formats, and they can be funny and weird and goofy. You could easily write a poem inspired by toilet paper. Now, if writing poems about toilet paper is just not your style, you can always try something more reflective. Which brings me to my next topic, reflections on writing reflective poetry. So there's a certain restaurant in Japan, I've heard, that allows customers to hurl plates against the wall. Why? To allow customers to vent their anger. And vent means to release strong feelings. Everyone feels better when they have the chance to express their feelings, right? Well, poetry allows us to express our feelings and opinions. For example, when I was young, practicing music was one of the activities that I most dreaded. I told my parents 10 million times that I was bored to death with music, but they completely ignored me, like most parents probably would in a similar situation. So one day I wrote a poem detailing my ineptitude, or not being good at music, and the unfairness of practicing it. And guess what? I'm now totally music free. But the point is, you can use poetry to express your opinions about the world around you. So, for instance, I watch news of politics a lot in my everyday life, and I'm often frustrated by the incompetence of some of the world's important leaders. So some of my frustration was channeled in my poem, which I titled The Perfect Club. We banish every hypocrite who professes to be just, then throws a child's life away and says that they must. We exile the power-hungry who sit upon their thrones, but then do nothing good for us but leave us all alone. We do not care for greediness, nor liars flaming red. We believe their mouths are sour from everything they've said. The overproud may strut outside, they'll stain our reputation. Our club is flawless, yet I wish it were a nation. So, in The Perfect Club, I reflect on world politics. In some of my other poems, I may reflect on everyday stuff, like being sick. When I write poetry, I try to persuade people to look at everyday things in a new light. In order to get people to take notice, I play around. And poems are really reflections of the world. And poets reflect what they see and feel in that world, in their everyday world. And poets can play with reflections. As you may have noticed, if you've ever stood before a mirror that makes you look really, really fat or way too thin or makes your head stretched out, which you can do in like something like a photo booth, which is fun, you can really play with a reflection easily. And you can not only do that with a mirror, you can do that with writing. You can distort a reflection, which means to change its shape. So we have the original head here, and then we stretch it out. So you can really distort a reflection. For example, when you describe something in a poem, you can exaggerate it or make it bigger or smaller, just stretch it out to make it funnier or more dramatic. For example, in my poem, Backyard Battle, I turn a day of reading into an epic battle. And you should definitely check out my book, Dancing Fingers, to see that poem. Recommend it. You can magnify a reflection. So, does anybody want to guess what magnify means? Okay, I think some of us will know that. It means to make something bigger. So occasionally to blow it out of proportion. This. For example, you could focus on something that is normally so small that it is ignored. So something so tiny, I don't know, something random, like a USB thing to poke it. That might be an interesting thing for a poem. You could do it on a scarab beetle. Something that's really tiny, you can zero in on that and make it bigger. Sometimes your reflections, like a rain puddle or a rear view mirror, only capture a tiny part of the world. You don't have to reflect on grand world events. Instead, you could write a reflective poem about something tiny and interesting, like a rain sliding on a window pane or a frightened mouse. Which brings me to my next subject, writing ideas. And some of those ideas are write a poem about something that makes you want to throw plates. For instance, if I was really mad at my sister, which has happened, then I could write a poem about my sister and how annoying she is. I can tell you I'd get a lot of inspiration for that one. You could write a poem based on news story. Personally, I watch the news about 3 times a day for quite a while. I'm kind of obsessed with the news, I'll admit. And so I get lots of inspiration there as well. You could write a poem that exaggerates an event. A lot of us like making things bigger, kind of blow things out of proportion, so you could exaggerate something. Maybe a festival that you had a fun time at, you could make it sound like the funnest thing in the world. Write a poem that calls attention to something tiny and often ignored. So what's something tiny and often ignored? I'm tempted to think myself, but I'll probably think of something a little smaller, maybe an ant or a bit of dust on a windowsill. You can really zero in on that kind of thing and write a poem about it. So here are some ideas to get you started on your poetry writing journey in Reflections. I hope that you have a fun time reflecting and that you've enjoyed this segment.